While terrain and objectives were important to the coalition's victory, the quality and quantity of weapons deployed in support of Operation Desert Storm proved to be too much for Iraq's military capabilities. Nowhere was this more evident than in the battle for air superiority. After months of preparation, the massive coalition air assault began on 17th of January 1991. Over 2,000 sorties, or missions, were flown against Iraqi targets on the first night. By the end of the war, over 100,000 sorties had been flown. Perhaps the most familiar images of the war were the black and white videos of smart bombs striking their targets with pinpoint precision. But these images represented only the final product of a strike package that had taken the Air Force decades to construct. The integrated force package was intended to overcome air defenses and establish air superiority while keeping the loss of planes and pilots to the very minimum. Coalition planners expected the Iraqis to vigorously resist an air assault. The U.S. Air Force and Navy had learned at great cost in Vietnam that modern air defense systems such as missiles and radar-directed guns could take a lethal toll on attacking aircraft. It was the experiences of the Vietnam War that led the U.S. Air Forces to devote considerable attention to new methods to overcome enemy air defenses.
The reason we were successful in Desert Storm as well as we were is because we suppressed the enemy air defenses right off the bat, first order of business. And we did it through a whole variety of means, from bombing airfields to taking down telephone buildings to knocking out radar sites to shooting down mirages in the air. That is going to be vital to any campaign we do where the enemy has an air force or an air defense system. And I don't know of a country in the world that hasn't invested heavily in those kinds of capabilities.
The first step in the air war was to take away the enemy's eyes. If the enemy's radar could be blinded, his air defenses would be rendered ineffective. In Vietnam, as well as in the Gulf War, the traditional methods were twofold. Radars were destroyed by radiation-seeking missiles. This was the job of the F-4G Wild Weasel. Wild Weasels located the radars on their sensors and attacked them with HARM anti-radar missiles. The second traditional method was electronic jamming. This was the job of the EF-111 Raven. The Ravens flew over the combat area and jammed the enemy radars with their powerful electronic systems.
The Iraqi air defense network was basically defeated in the first 24 hours. After that, it was reduced to a residual level of effectiveness, and while it required sorties, aircraft to be directed against it for the remainder of the war, it was really not going to be a factor in the ultimate outcome. It looked much more to a ground threat rather than a sophisticated air threat. Another reason the Iraqi air defense collapsed was the sheer size and sophistication of the effort put against it. Electronic warfare was used against Iraqi air defenses to a degree never seen before in any conflict. Much more of it, much more sophisticated than had been seen in Vietnam, than had been seen in earlier wars in the Middle East.
The air campaign over Iraq marked the first serious combat debut of stealth aircraft. The F-117 stealth fighter embodied an entirely novel approach to the problem of overcoming air defenses. The shape and construction of the aircraft prevented Iraqi radar from seeing it, except at extremely close ranges. Armed with precision-guided bombs, the stealth strike fighter played a disproportionate role in the initial attacks. Although the stealth squadrons constituted only 2.5% of the attack force, they were responsible for attacking 31% of the targets on the first day, when air defenses were heaviest.
I don't think there's any doubt that stealth has revolutionized air warfare, and we saw that with the 117. It was kind of interesting. There were all these detractors against the 117, even some of them in the Air Force during the 70s and 80s, and obviously after it was well known we had this capability. It's interesting to know that we never had a single stealth aircraft hit by ground fire or any kind of enemy defenses. And they flew the toughest missions. They were the ones that we sent to Baghdad night after night after night. So it gives you tremendous advantage.
By the end of the war, F-117s had flown over 3,000 sorties and delivered 2,000 tons of bombs, a small but important portion of the total number of bombs dropped in the conflict. 1/3 of all smart munitions used during the war were delivered by F-117s. But stealth involved more than defeating the enemy by near invisibility. It also meant the economy of combining the capabilities of many aircraft into one. While serving as a strike fighter, the F-117 does not require the assistance of electronic warfare aircraft like the Wild Weasel or the Raven. For example, a strike on an Iraqi nuclear reactor near Baghdad by 16 conventional F-16 strike fighters required a further 40 support aircraft and was not entirely successful. A follow-on strike by 8 F-117s was entirely successful and required the support of only 2 refueling tankers. Over 80% of all bombs dropped by F-117s during the conflict destroyed their targets. Stealth aircraft, although more costly to purchase than conventional strike aircraft, demonstrate a significant advantage in the overall cost of a strike force. These experiences are shaping current notions of future combat aircraft. New generations of future American combat aircraft, such as the F-22 Lightning II fighter, the Comanche Scout helicopter, and the B-2 Spirit bomber, are all based around stealth concepts pioneered by the F-117 stealth strike fighter. If one image of the Gulf War predominates, it is the precision-guided munition flying unerringly to its target. Ironically, the weapon that was at the center of this image, the laser-guided bomb, was not as new a weapon as most people thought. What was new was the more important role it played in the air campaign.
I don't really know why people were shocked by laser-guided bombs, since laser-guided bombs were invented during the Vietnam War, were used with great success and with a good deal of publicity at that time. For example, I think there was a famous brig that was taken down by laser-guided bombs. Laser-guided bombs were also used in the raid on Tripoli in '86, again with a lot of publicity. I believe they were also used in the attacks on the Iranians in '87, again with publicity. The surprise was that there weren't that many of them, because a laser-guided attack almost inevitably generates a video. Most of what you saw in the way of videos were laser-guided attacks. And I think that many people had never seen that kind of video before. However, the bomb itself isn't all that different than the product that you would have seen, say, in 1970. It's a very simple device, very effective.
About 9% of the bombs used were laser-guided bombs or other forms of precision munitions. Such weapons, while costly to develop and manufacture, are more valuable than conventional bombs since they require fewer combat missions to accomplish an objective. Typically, the precision-guided bombs struck their targets 90% of the time, while conventional bombs seldom hit more than 25% of their targets. The attack on a pinpoint target such as a bridge would take dozens of missions using unguided bombs before the bridge would be destroyed. With precision-guided bombs, a few missions would accomplish the same task. And fewer missions means that fewer aircraft and crews are lost to enemy air defenses. With its air defense system largely destroyed and coalition air forces swarming over the conflict zone, the Iraqi Air Force had little choice than to avoid air combat and instead protect their aircraft. The dogfighting that did occur was entirely one-sided. Iraqi fighters did not manage to down a single coalition aircraft, while coalition fighters shot down 35 Iraqi warplanes. The Iraqi Air Force, which seemed so imposing on paper, proved almost entirely incapable of putting up any serious resistance. Unable to challenge the Allies in the air, the Iraqi Air Force commanders sought to protect their aircraft by hiding them in concrete reinforced hangars. But the Allied air forces, with strategic targets largely eliminated, soon began attacking the hardened shelters. Of the 594 Iraqi aircraft shelters identified at the outset of the war, 375 were destroyed. In desperation to save what was left of its air force, over 100 Iraqi planes fled to Iran. Iran has refused to give them back, declaring them reparations for the Iran-Iraq War. Although not destroyed, those Iraqi aircraft that flew to Iran were effectively put out of action. With Iraq's air defenses incapacitated and its air force decimated, coalition air forces turned their attention to Iraqi ground units in and near Kuwait.